Joining me here on set, Kellyanne Conway, former counsel to President Trump, host of Here's the Deal on Fox Nation. Hi, Kellyanne.
Hello.
What do you make of this story? It's so interesting. You have terrible jobs report, markets are way down, but you got people resigning from the Federal Reserve, which is interesting. And he's got a chance now to put his own people into the Fed, finally. And I don't know why Jay Powell is clinging to this just when others are being more diplomatic. I think Michael Barr, who was the vice chairman, he may resign. That's what you do, right? I mean, it's not to say it's too political. Of course, yes, everything in that sense. But he has a chance to name his own Fed, and they have got to change their policy. You're an economic person, consumer attitudes you've been polling for a long time. The high interest rates are hurting sectors of the housing's being hurt, credit card, car sales, blah, blah, blah. Why can't he have his own?
He should. Look, he's done the hard stuff. He is ripping out root and branch the Biden policies, ESG and CRT and DEI and BLM. He's taking care of the wars that Biden got us into, Russia, Ukraine, Israel. Biden bombed, Trump's bombing Iran. It's totally different. The border is sealed. He's doing the hard stuff. The easy stuff should be personnel.
Yes.
And if you don't have the dignity to resign and move on, then allow yourself to be replaced. I fear some days that Jay Powell thinks he wants to be the first person of great consequence who left the Trump administration or was fired and goes out and gets $1 million book deal and a $100,000 speech here and is petted by all the think tanks on the left and can join whatever golf club he wants. I fear that because there's no explanation as to why they haven't cut rates, and here's why. We lost independence of the Fed in September when they cut rates by 50 basis points.
Right.
They went 0, 0, 0, 0, 50.
Right.
Why?
Right.
Because they had a turkey of a nominee in Kamala Harris. Did you see her again on Stephen Colbert? One is less funny than the next. Neither will have anything big to do in a couple months from now. Neither will have a job. The Fed cut interest rates, many of us know, because they needed to prop up the economy for Kamala Harris, who was a terrible candidate. So we lost the independence, and I would say got a politicized Fed at that moment. And the other thing, Larry, is if Kudlow has resigned, that's great. You've got Bowman and Waller dissenting this week, and 3 days later proven that the dissent had a point. They were worried about labor and housing, and here we are.
Like reading tomorrow's newspaper.
That's right,
I mean,
and
I've
here
never
we are.
seen such accurate.
Yes.
Right.
So I hope President Trump does here what he's doing all across the board with personnel, because we know personnel is policy, that he makes a move so that he gets a Fed more in line. Surface Transportation Board. These railroads want to merge. He has a chance in September to name a new person there. It'll be 3-2 Republicans. So a lot is going on personnel-wise. I want to go to the economy, though. You know, the worst thing President Trump can do to you is not fire you. The worst thing President Trump can do to you is not fire you, but make you irrelevant. And I think that's what he's doing with the Fed here, too. He's taking care of inflation and the economy and these trade deals and dereg and the one big, beautiful bill without the Fed doing its job. He basically is backfilling he and his team.
He's set everything up. He set
it all up, and it's
stage
working, by the way, and it's working. One jobs report aside, it's working.
But the Fed should not be allowed to stand in the way. That's
They are
my
standing
point.
in the way and building big, beautiful buildings instead of big, beautiful bills.
Right, the Taj Mahal. Can I ask you, we had Mohammed El-Arian on. Who's not a political guy. I don't know whether he's left.
I know.
But here's the point he made. Powell's made so many mistakes. Okay, he pumping up inflation under Biden, waiting too long, in denial about it. Your point about the political rate cut on the eve of the election in September of 2024, stubbornly clinging to some tariff analysis that the economics profession doesn't agree with. Jay Powell staying at the Fed is destroying Fed independence.
It'll destroy his legacy, too. If he cares about his legacy, someone who's been in the federal government for, 12 or 13 years now and had a pretty good career before that at Carlisle, I'm sure made good coin. If he cares about his legacy, his best legacy runs through a prosperous Donald Trump economy because he would have been there for both terms, the first term and the second term. So even if that doesn't make any sense on that. But look what's happening with the tariffs. If I could just quickly say, you asked me about the consumers. Consumers are happy right now. I don't care if this one predicts recession and that one is screaming Armageddon. Consumers are happy because they see a president standing up for them by standing up for American workers. When you're onshoring more production here, when you're recalibrating globalization, when you're getting people to the negotiating table to make a bilateral deal, Larry, that otherwise wouldn't be there but for the tariffs, when you have Canada and Mexico being told, get your fentanyl and your criminals out of this country, or we'll tariff you. Things are happening, and people see that that's for them. This direct foreign investment is huge.
Yes.
People say Donald Trump's an isolationist. U.S. deals direct foreign investment. These trade deals are direct foreign investments. UK, EU, Japan, now Korea.
Never before.
And he's using, I think, the sharpest tool in Donald Trump's well-stocked arsenal is trade.
Right.
I think it is his sharpest tool because he's actually using it for peace deals as well.
He didn't bring $6 trillion into this, but some of this has never been done before. He's using tariff diplomacy and trade diplomacy to bring governments in. Governments invest in the United States as well as private business. This is completely different, and economists should not ignore this. This overwhelms any fiscal drag from 15% tariff. But meanwhile, we're making good money off that. But they are financing the American economy. I'm just saying this. Come back to the Fed. I just don't want Powell to stand in the way. You know what I mean? High interest rates can do that. And I don't know if you're consumer polling. The housing has been in a recession. The mortgage rates are too high. The credit cards are up to 30%. That kind of stuff, we don't need that kind of stuff.
And we know that hurts.
Get out of the way.
That hurts the small business owners, the kitchen table economics, absolutely. And Larry, the other thing about trade here is I no longer speak for the president, but I certainly speak to him, and I suspect that he would tell all these companies, these countries, tariffs are your choice, not mine.
Oh, yeah.
You just want to onshore more in America, make more in America, allow the world to buy more from America, and stop taxing things like 10% on our U.S. autos in Europe, 2.5% for their autos here. You don't need to be a brilliant economist like you're a pollster like me to know that's just not fair, fourfold. So tariffs are other people's choices. Get with it and understand that the president is serious when he says that he wants our native-born Americans to be getting these jobs. And the latest jobs report shows that again.
Yes, that is
foreign-born workers are losing jobs, native-born. This is what he promised. This is why he was elected. And I would go a little step farther, what Kevin and you were talking about, Hassan. He's being diplomatic about his own chances. I think the president has an embarrassment of riches in candidates, probably in a few we haven't thought of or discussed in terms of who should take over the Fed. But you know what, Larry? The president can't go wrong in making that happen. And like anything else, why would you want to sit in a job where you're not welcome and people don't think you're doing a good job? It doesn't make any sense. And we both work with Jay Powell. We were there when he was selected the first time.
He's not a bad person. He's not a bad person.
But he's doing a bad job at this point. The 50 basis cuts, if it were zero all the way across.
It's time to go.
It's time to go because you're hurting the consumers now where President Trump and that one big beautiful bill are helping the consumers.
All right, terrific stuff. Kellyanne Conway. You can catch Kellyanne hosting Here's the Deal on Fox Nation. Thank you very much.